In the shallowest waters of the Florida's saltwater estuaries, which we call the flats, especially via kayak, it's possible to actually see the fish in order to make a cast to them. Some critics of this technique say that the fish can see us just as often as we see them, but the reality is it's the most exciting part of fishing to be able to stalk and look for your prey, then being able to make that cast that just lands in the right place. Here you've seen a few examples of sometimes how the technique doesn't work, but what I want to show you next are some of the techniques and the occasions when it does work. This is all part of sight fishing, an advanced study and look at how to catch fish by looking for the fish, making the cast, and how to make the right presentation in order to really maximize your fun. So, first of all, what is sight fishing? One way to think about sight fishing is not making a single cast until you've covered enough water and you've identified a fish like we see here. Here's a few examples of the most fun times when it works. If the weather forecast calls for sunny skies and calm winds, I know I'm going to catch fish because I'm going to be able to see them, make my cast, and they're going to take it. And in these modern times, redfish aren't only found just on the flats, they're also found through social media. As you view the following videos, you'll notice that I circle the fish in red so you can see what I'm targeting, and you'll see I find them in a number of different circumstances, and I catch them in a number of different ways. But every time first, I see either the fish or some sign of the fish. Sure, you can go out somewhere on the salt water, throw out live bait, and wait for something to happen, but as the comedian Stephen Wright said, sometimes fishing is simply a matter of one jerk on the end of the line waiting for a jerk on the other. Instead, I like to target the fish, and it's just as much thrill to see the fish and encounter them as it is sometimes to catch them. Here you'll notice the fish sniffs the lure, starts to follow it, and then gives up. Even these circumstances can be a lot of fun. If you're not sure what a school of tailing redfish looks like, check out this. And you'll notice that the tails don't fully protrude from the water. Sometimes it's just the tip of the tail that comes out of the surface. It's always important in these circumstances to cast to the very edge of the school, because for every tail that you do see, there can be 3 to 5 fish that you don't see. Once you draw it along the edge, one of the fish on the edge of the school will grab the lure, hopefully, and it's off to the races. And you can tell by this view that the redfish is enjoying sight fishing as much as I am because of the smile on his face. And it's not always actually seeing the fish, but signs of the fish, perhaps from the fins protruding on the surface of the water, and this is especially true on extremely calm days without any wind. A big part of the challenge is putting the lure right in front of the fish so it thinks it stumbled upon a meal. It's just like making the perfect putt in golf or taking the right shot in basketball. In heavily fished waters such as East Central Florida, it's especially important to cast far beyond the fish, giving it a sufficient lead so that the fish isn't aware that something's touched down. And then once the fish intercepts the lure, they tear into it. Here's a fish that's moving away from me, and all that's protruding from the water is its dorsal fin and its tail. This is a term we like to call snaking because it looks like a snake moving on the ground. When this fish is moving away from me in this mode, I know 2 things. Number 1, it's in search of a meal, and number 2, I've got a high chance of catching it because it's not going to be aware that I'm following it. What sometimes confuses people about my video is that they see me reeling the lure really fast, but what I'm really trying to do is get the lure into the zone. the zone which is the range that the fish can see, and once I get it in front of it, the fish usually pounces on it. To those that sight fish, it's not just actually catching the fish, but actually just coming into contact with them and seeing two fish side by side just cruising the flats. Unfortunately, these two fish are bigger fish, which means they're older fish, and also implies they're wiser. They knew I was there. Sometimes, as you'll see in this case, it's extremely difficult to get the right angle, so instead the lure ends up heading right towards the side of the fish, which startles them. Here's another example of where I've seen a few tails and fins just poking up out of the surface of the water, indicating a school of redfish. I cast to the very edge of the area that I think the school of the fish occupies, and here's the results. Not all the fish make it into my hands, but it's still fun to be able to encounter them and fool them in their own element. Here's a situation where I had just seen a fish crashing bait up against the shore by trapping him, and then as I got closer, I made a visual confirmation. Here's another fish that releases himself before I can get my hands on him, but that's why we have video in addition to pictures. In these situations, it's hard, but not impossible, to make a second cast to fool him. In this situation, this fish is obviously a very fast learner. In these super shallow areas, there's a lot of grass, so it's important to use a soft plastic that I rigged completely weedless. As a result, unfortunately, not every hookup is solid, but at least I get more opportunities by using such weedless rigs. So, if you're going to pursue sight fishing, it's first important to completely understand what exactly it is that you look for. Let's start by taking a look at a few examples of tailing fish. Redfish especially are known for this kind of behavior. The first situation here is on my first paddle out in the morning trying to get to the fishing flats, and look what I see in front of me. This view is from the camera that I mount on the bow of my kayak. Here's the same view from the video camera on my hat. Although you hear lots of talk about tailing redfish, it's actually not very common that they do that. But especially in the early morning hours, it's actually quite common to see them finning, which is where some part of the fin will be protruding from the water to give their location away. This encounter is especially awesome, and I wanted to add it to the video because we see the redfish actually nail something in the water, clearly giving itself away. In this part, you'll notice that the fish is extremely subtle in how its fin protrudes from the water. But it's a very deliberate movement, and it's this very deliberate direction that really differentiates a redfish from a mullet. If you cover a lot of water and you're especially vigilant, you can encounter redfish feeding and catching bait on their own. Watch this video right in front of that little bit of grass that's sticking up there in the water off the edge of that point. And then when you see a redfish tear out in the middle of the water, especially if it doesn't even know you're there, it's definitely found something and it's feeding on it. You'd be surprised at what extremely large redfish occupy such super shallow water. And when they're on the prowl, sometimes their fins don't break the surface, but they do create a wake, and they actually look like a small boat, except there's nothing there in the water. Keep in mind that the wake forms after the fish has moved through the water, so it's important to get plenty of lead time in front of these wakes. Consider at least 3 feet in front of the wake so that the fish can see the lure. Like we just identified in the previous section, sometimes redfish will tear through the water because they've just captured something. And usually they leave a wake after this, which makes targeting them a lot easier. Redfish are ambush predators, so they definitely have a distinct advantage by trapping bait up against the edge of a shoreline. Take advantage of the fact that your kayak can go super shallow and get close into these areas and look for fish cruising the shore. Here's an example of one right up against the shoreline. These situations can be really tough because they require an extreme amount of accuracy. Just putting it there in the mangroves can certainly ruin an opportunity. Let's take a look at a few examples of how to identify a school of redfish. After I make this cast, you'll see the unique ripples on the surface of the water that give a school of redfish away. It's so important, I've got to reiterate, you've got to cast to the edge of the school. Too many times I've seen people cast so that the lure goes right through the middle and it startles the entire school. Make sure you take advantage of just exactly how shallow your kayak can go. You'll be surprised where you can find redfish. You'll notice that when I'm getting to my fishing grounds, I'm going to areas where boats would simply bottom out or not even be able to navigate. In fact, I've gone to areas so shallow I couldn't even paddle through them, so I'd have to get out and pull my kayak. Keep in mind, my video camera uses a wide-angle lens, so this area is a lot more enclosed and a lot more shallow than it appears. And sure enough, it's got redfish. This is an area that boats just simply can't get to, and sure enough, look what I run into. I mentioned snaking before, and that's the term we use to describe when the dorsal fin and the tail fin are just slightly protruding from the water, and so the fish looks just like a snake on the ground the way it moves. This is the situation I get the most excited about because that clearly indicates a redfish that's on the prowl and looking for one thing, and that's food. The nice thing about snaking redfish is that you can see them from quite a distance, so it's no longer that situation of who sees who first. You can see the advantage here. The redfish swallows the lure before he gets away. The last thing I want to point out is how important it is to get the lure really close to the fish, because the water that we think is crystal clear, when you're actually in the water, it's actually not that clear. Here's an example of what a redfish actually sees when it's cruising around.